What should be done to make this alliance, which is of strategic importance for the future of the West, stronger and crisis resilient? What values and interests can unite Europeans and the US Americans? And to what initiatives and by whom should be taken in this field? There are just some questions of our debate today. As the panelists, I have the honor to present you our outstanding experts. So Professor Zbigniew Lewicki, Chairman of the Council of the Polish Institute of International Affairs, Head of the Department of American Studies at the Kardynał Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw. Colonel retired Ray Wojcik, Director of Center for European Policy Analysis in Warsaw. Edith Skut from Warsaw, but also from Hungary, political scientist, guest lecturer at Center for Europe, University of Warsaw. And Minister Knut ABRAHAM, Minister Plenipotentiary at the German Embassy in Poland, so Vice Ambassador to Poland. And Łukasz Warzecha, columnist of the weekly Dotyczą, a respected journalist in Poland. And my name is Andrzej Godlewski, and I have the honor to moderate the debate. And this debate is taking place within the framework of Forum Dialogue Plus, which is a series of discussion on key challenges for Poland and Europe. And I'd like to say thank you very much to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Warsaw and the Foundation for Polish-German Cooperation for their support and cooperation. Short introduction, sorry for that. And so the first question on Ray Wojcik. So last week at the Munich Security Conference, Chancellor Angela Merkel and Vice President Mike Pence delivered speeches which made the transatlantic rift once again more visible. Chancellor Merkel defended multilateralism and shared values, while Vice President Pence was focused on the vision of the US leadership in which the Europeans should follow US actions and decisions. But now Europe is facing so many challenges from China, from Russia, but we are so divided. Why? And why is it so difficult to start joint initiative and actions? And why, using Angela Merkel's wording, do not Russian missiles or Chinese ships, yet German cars suddenly pose a threat to the US security? Right.
Thank you very much for the invitation, being able to participate today. So just a little bit more about my background. You know, I started serving in the military in the 1980s in Europe, in Germany. And so my first experiences with being abroad and also working as a soldier was in a multilateral NATO context. And in those days, we had a great incredible partnership with another German unit that was, you know, meeting with us, sharing military experience and so forth, on and on. Much actually like we see going on today in Poland. But so from the very beginning, you know, at the center of how I see the European relationship with the United States, and certainly from SIPA's perspective, our organization, the transatlantic relationship is absolutely crucial to security of the West and the rules-based order that's developed since World War II. So just referring to the Munich Security Conference, that I think one of the interesting things that's going on, or the dynamic recently, has been that the United States is heavily criticized, as you say, for some of the rhetoric coming from the president, and in some of the ways things are done stylistically. But I would also say that at the same time, when in fact, as you described, the vice president sort of, you know, the Americans are staking out a position and we need the Europeans to follow vis-a-vis Iran, for example. You know, a couple months ago at the Warsaw Security Conference, where Secretary General former Rasmussen spoke, is very European, you know, multilateralist. His point was, where's the United States? Where's the international policemen? Where are you guys? How come you left the stage? So in some ways it's hard currently to be an American for a lot of reasons, okay? But also there's this dynamic of how much leadership is needed, how much leadership is causing friction, because certainly there's friction when it comes to the positions on Iran, for example. So, so with that in mind, I'd just like to, and most of us are fairly aware of this, but I'd just like to stake out the positions on what we've been doing on the security front the last few years, which clearly indicate that we're not going anywhere. The United States is, security is linked directly to European security, and we're here and we're demonstrating that on a daily basis with our forward deployments, leadership in that area, also with our institutional stance from Congress sending the largest delegation in history to the Munich Security Conference to show it's just not about one president or one person in the United States, how we feel about transatlantic relationship. So I'll just leave it there for now.
So we'll come back to the issues you have mentioned. But now German perspective. Knut ABRAHAM, Chancellor American and German government politicians are opposing to the Trump administration for its withdrawal from Iran nuclear deal, from the announced withdrawal from Syria, its disapproval to Nord Stream 2, and for disapproval of Washington to increase gas imports from Russia, and as well as demands for higher defense expenditure. Are there any interests which Germany and the US would currently have in common?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And perhaps another.
Take the red one. Take the red one. Yeah, of course. Well, I think we have to be very clear when debating our internal things that the main challenge we are facing is I don't know how this really works. Maybe
that way? Oh, wow, thank you. The biggest challenge we are all facing is the aggression by Putin's Russia, or Russia's Putin in both ways. So we have to be very clear on that. It's the occupation of Crimea, as we all know. It's the situation in Donbass, the aggression there, the violation of INF. In the case of Germany, very strongly the disinformation campaigns we are facing. So the worst thing we can do, or the best thing to serve Putin, is to struggle internally, and to struggle visibly internally, or even facing a certain infight in the alliance. So we have to be clear that NATO is still the joint guarantee against this aggression we are facing, and what we see what is happening in Ukraine, for example. So Germany tries to position itself to today's challenges, and when you look at the budget, it is really a challenge for us, because there was a certain understanding after '89 and in the '90s that things would calm down, and we were having a partnership with Russia. So the willingness, the readiness to invest in defense was shrinking, and we all know that. But we have seen the turnaround, and I know that it's about 2%. Of course, I know the papers, I know the history, but 1.5% of the GDP in 2024 for Germany is a huge step. When you look at the real figures, yeah, it's a lot of money. So what we've seen already is an increase. The non-American partners have increased the defense spending already about 100 billion US dollars until the end of next year, and until the end of 2024, more than 350 billion US dollars. But we can discuss these figures. I think the main thing is that the German political elite and the government and the society have understood that it is necessary to invest in security. And when I'm doing this, sometimes I do, it's good to have this reality check with the population. What I really like to do is do town hall meetings in Germany. And my test question is, to the audience always, how many tanks do you think Germany has? Standard answer from the audience is 2,000. I say, no, not exactly. And then people are saying, 4,000? I say, no. It's, and the figure is real, 250. And being a retired private first class colonel, I remember that in reality that would mean that only half of these 250 are operational. And then that's interesting. And of course it's a town hall meeting, so not a party convention or so there are people from all political convictions, beliefs, affiliations present. And all of them, from the very left to the populist right, they do not feel comfortable with these figures. So there is a readiness and an understanding to invest. That's the main message, and that is transported by the Chancellor in her speech in Munich, by the Minister of Defense, so this is the main point. But also, when you look back in the last years, it is not that Germany was sleeping. I mean, we have been, for 20 years now, being the second biggest troop provider in Afghanistan. It's still 1,300 German soldiers in Afghanistan. We are the framework nation for the enhanced forward presence in Lithuania, a big step for Germany. And I know where I'm sitting and speaking today in Warsaw. It was politically, psychologically not easy to take the German society on board to have permanent German troops in Lithuania. The Lithuanians are enthusiastic about that, but this was to be understood. And now we are quite proud of that, and so the main shift has been achieved already.
You have seen we have two retired officers in our panel discussion, but not only military issues we have to discuss. We will come back, Minister Abraham, to the Nord Stream 2 issue.
Yes.
But at the beginning, so we have a kind of diagnosis, and so I'd like to ask Professor Lewicki. In the opinion of many European politicians, President Donald Trump does not care about the views or interests of the Europeans. And perhaps a kind of provocative question, why does President Trump see traditional European allies as economic rivals only?
Thank you very much. I see I am a defender, sole defender of Donald Trump on this side of the Atlantic or whatever. Let me just start with a disclaimer. Whatever I'm saying in private capacity, not as an official at the Institute of International Affairs. Their views may differ from mine. Donald Trump is an American president. Donald Trump's first responsibility is for the United States. Donald Trump says America first. Now, what does any leader in the world say otherwise? Chancellor Merkel, Germany first, obviously. De Gaulle, Macron, whatever. Any leader who does not say my country first is a traitor. Obviously enough, you can help other countries, you can cooperate with other countries, but putting the interests of your country first is an obligation, a duty of every political leader. Now, we all know that the United States has its share of problems, economic and otherwise. We know that the United States spends a lot of money on international issues, whether it's military or economic, assistance, presence, and so on and so on. And we all know that Europe, for the last 20 years at least, it has been a free rider. NATO means the United States. Without the United States, NATO security guarantees don't exist. We know what happened in Libya, defenseless Libya, and yet 2 or 3 major European countries were unable to fight the war in Libya without American assistance, without American ammunition, which they ran out of within the first 3 or 4 days, without AWACS and so on and so on, against a country that had no defense to speak of. Now, if something happens in the East, if Putin, Russia, decides to move west, without the United States, we cannot stop it. Now, it was obvious that after the Second World War, the United States was the only country with means to defend the world and so on. But nowadays, Germany is a very rich country, and yet you pointed yourself to the sorry state of the German military, obviously not. West European countries have been spending a lot of money on social assistance, paid vacation, retirement funds, all kinds of things, because they didn't have to spend on the military, on security. Obviously, no government in West Europe would now be able to switch the money from social issues to military issues, because they would be voted out of power, the next day. We still depend on the United States, and of course we are now the frontiers country, so to speak. When Germany was a frontier country, all German governments loved the United States. And there's no wonder that we now love the United States, because this is the only security provider we can think of. Donald Trump, basically, he doesn't differ all that much in this approach from Obama. His rhetoric is different. But Obama also said, help us with Afghanistan, and he made this tour in Europe in which he asked for increased expenditures and increased number of troops to no avail, basically. And he got disappointed. He talked about the pivot and all those kind of things. His language was much more, quote-unquote, civilized. But he also realized that it's time for the United States to force increased involvement of Western Europe in the field of security. Trump is much more straightforward. You may not like his rhetoric, but this is the time West Europe grows up and takes care of its own needs, of its own interests, and it's time Europe does not limit itself to speeches. Whether it's 1.5% or 2% or whatever, we are still a long way from being able to provide our own security in case of Russia's aggression. And until that happens, we'll be depending on the United States, which is not a comfortable situation. And the United States has limited responsibility for providing, rather than taking care of its own economic needs. All of us who've been to the United States know there are regions in the States which are very poor. West Virginia, the South, whatever, not to mention infrastructure. There's a lot of good reasons to spend money within the United States rather than spend money for the countries that could afford to do it themselves. So I don't think it's the question of Trump. Trump puts bluntly what other politicians, starting with Robert Gates, as you remember, many years ago, when he said, it's time for Europe to pay for its own security. And this is the reality. Thank you.
So we are continuing our reality check, and once again, it's a Central European point of view. Edith's good from Warsaw and from Budapest as well, and it's really interesting to get to know sort of Hungarian, the Hungarian point of view, because despite of criticism from Washington, Hungary seems to have very good relations with the with the US, while keeping at the same time very good relations with Russia and China. And what is the secret of Hungary's foreign policy, and what are the interests of Hungarian government?
So thank you very much. I would like to thank the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. Yeah, so let me start with the point that there's no such thing as geopolitical vacuum in international relations and politics. And once the United States has just withdrawn from the region, of course the Russians and the Chinese was trying to fill in. And if you have a look at the numbers, how many times Viktor Orban has met Vladimir Putin in the last couple of years, since the Eastern Ukrainian crisis has erupted, they have met 7 times, last year 2 times. And the last time when an American State Secretary has visited Hungary was like in 2011. George W. Bush has visited Hungary in 2006. So of course, there was a space to maneuver for other global superpowers. And Viktor Orban has been always trying to maneuver between global superpowers. So that's his key sort of modus operandi when it comes to foreign politics. I think it's worth mentioning that like bilateral relations, American-Hungarian relations were quite frosty during the Obama administrations, that the Obama administration was quite harshly criticizing the democratic backsliding and the anti-democratic like sort of policies of the Hungarian government. And it not necessarily changed right after Trump took power, despite the fact that the Hungarian Prime Minister was the first who endorsed Trump. Due to the shared values when it comes to anti-immigrant, anti-PC, anti-establishment sort of shared values, but also because, and I think his calculation was quite correct, that Viktor Orban was aiming for a sort of a shift in terms of the approach of the United States, that the Trump administration is not going to interfere, and they're not going to try to restrict the Hungarian government when it comes to democratic backsliding. And slowly, very slowly, we can see that there is a change in the approach. David Kornstein, the new ambassador, has just arrived to Hungary last summer, and all of a sudden, for instance, the case of the Central European University, which was quite crucial for the Hungarian government, is on the table by the end of the last year, and there is a certain shift, not openly criticizing the Hungarian government. So in this regard, his calculation was correct. What we have learned from this Pompeo visit, like recently, is that at the very same time, the US administration showed and underlined that they have a better understanding of how Russian and Chinese influence, state corruption, and democratic backsliding is related. So I don't think it's quite important that Mike Pompeo has met with those civil society organizations that are being labeled by the Hungarian government as the enemy of the nation. But it's quite crucial that he just highlighted that the State Department is going to step up by funding those organizations. So, like, without saying out loud, the key message was like, we'll be watching you when it comes to, you know, rolling back civil and political rights. But having a look at the agreement that has been made recently is that as long as, I mean, in the exchange of significant military agreements that is like that will fit the strategic goals of the United States, as long as it has been made, the US administration is ready to reduce criticism when it comes to domestic affairs. So I think it's quite a, we can say that this is a success for the Hungarian government.
Short additional question: is the Hungarian government interested in stronger, in better relationship between Europe and the US, or just the current situation is rather convenient for Viktor Orban?
As I just mentioned, that he's trying to maneuver between global powers, and given that he's in some sort of a diplomatic isolation in the EU, I think it's not an overstatement to say that he's in a problematic situation. It's very important that Russia and strong ties to Russia provides sort of protective shelter for Viktor Orban. So this is the way how he's trying to maneuver. He's saying that this is like strong relations to Russia are based on pragmatic sort of goals, but it's quite apparent that it goes way beyond pragmatism. Viktor Orban has been depicting Russia as a key model on 3 different levels in terms of diplomacy, economy, and also system building sort of efforts as well. And if you have a look at recent developments, I think it's also very important that besides energy agreements and how Viktor Orban is quite supportive towards the energy expansion of Russia in Europe, the recent developments show that he's quite supportive when it comes to financial expansion of Russia. The International Investment Bank has just moved its headquarters to Hungary, and it was quite striking to me that all the diplomatic and legal sort of privileges and immunity, they just get it. So we're talking about an institution which is practically a geopolitical tool of Russia when it comes to financial expansion, and their key goal is to establish some sort of alternative financial banking system, contrary to or against the Western banking system dominated by the US.
Thank you very much for this introduction. So we'll take some questions later, so please prepare some interventions. And so as we, as after this initial part of our discussions, so we can see there are a lot of interests which are not always they are not in common of all of the countries. But some countries, as China or Russia, so they are very keen on the situations, and they are exploiting so the rift, transatlantic rift. And so Hungary is just one example of it. What could be done to improve this interest? It's not only the matter of the German tanks, but perhaps the Nord Stream 2 could be a very easy issue to improve the European within Europe and European Atlantic relations, just stripping the project.
I think we are underway to exactly achieving this. Let me on Nord Stream. I mean, the Chancellor has made 2 major points in her speech in Munich last weekend, and that was that for her, when it comes to Nord Stream, the future guarantee for Ukraine to remain a gas transport country is essential, and that she is doing everything to achieve that. She is backing the Commission's negotiations in Moscow to achieve that. Second point the Chancellor was making is that is on the question of German European dependency on Russian gas. And when you look at the figures, that even with Nord Stream 2, there will be less than 50% dependency on Russian gas. And her analysis and the government's analysis is that we could handle that. But I was starting on an optimistic point, and this is because of two things. First, the agreement in the European Union on the gas directive is certainly a step forward to find a ground for future handling of questions like that. I can elaborate on that a little bit more. And the second is that you've seen in the last weeks and months that the German government, especially our Minister of the Economy, Peter Altmaier, is more and more pointing to German LNG terminals to be built as an additional guarantee to avoid a too strong dependency on Russian gas. But of course we look back to years of a very difficult discussion. And
a little bit like the migration issues. It is not that German politics are not aware of the fact that a policy like on Nord Stream 2 was not really consulted enough, probably, obviously, with the countries which were touched by this decision. But you know that there have been also very difficult discussions in Berlin on the project, and so I think the situation which we see now is hopefully in the end acceptable. On a private note, I think, and that is how I argued in many SIPA and other events, is the idea of explaining the whole project as a purely economic or entrepreneurial project, and I'm talking not, of course, not about my government, but of the public discussion, ignoring the political impact of that. That was hurting our credibility. But you know that the two main parties in Germany, which are building the governments, in plural, were differing on that question very strongly. And so we hope that with the regulation of future policies on gas and the investment in LNG terminals, the situation is under control. But I think what we have to learn, and I'm not saying that as a government spokesman, but also as someone who stands and sits here, is the European reflex, which we have to respect even more. Because for us, it's not. I agree, Professor, with almost everything you've said. And by the way, this is why we have to invest in European defense capabilities, together with Poland. But one point I do not agree, it's not Germany first. And to serve the interests, what we have to do is serve the interest of our people, of our citizens. But to serve the interests, the answer is not Germany first. It is to perform the best policies in the interest of the people, and this, in our understanding, is Europe and a European approach. And this is just one more minute. And it is quite logical when you look at the geographical position of Germany. We are centrally situated in Europe, so we are part of everything. We cannot go Germany first. We tried that, and I only have to look out of this window to see the consequences of that. So we have to serve the interests of the people, but the way we are doing it is the decisive question. And we know that we are too weak to go alone, and the United States think that they are strong enough. What we believe is that it's in the interest of both parties to go the reciprocal way to act jointly.
Thank you very much. A short question, and Professor Levy and Professor Levitsky and Frey. And you spent several years, Mr. Minister Abraham, in Federal Chancellor of America. Could you have had opportunities to present your point of view as to Chancellor Merkel on Nord Stream 2 as you have presented now?
Well, the situation, you have to look at the coalition agreements in plural. And as that, and this is not a secret, it was a point on which the two parties, the Christian Democratic side and the Social Democrats, were differing. And so the position was taken that the government should keep a neutrality on that question. That is, of course, very difficult to implement in a highly controversial issue like Nord Stream 2.
But that meant, let's look back how things began. That meant that, and we are back now at that point, that meant that the first question to be solved was, is Nord Stream 2 part of the third energy package of the European Union? And that was the consequence of our neutral positioning. We would have, as we did now, have accepted the decision of Brussels. But it didn't come. Not for gas policy reasons, but for institutional reasons within the European Union. And this divided view on Nord Stream continued, and as we have, and this is very important, as we have no possibility to block a legal project. So Nord Stream 2 is built by these companies, by the way, not only German companies. 50% is of course Gazprom, I know, but the other 50% are two German companies, Shell, Dutch, OMV, Austrian, sorry, and NG, French. So it's not German-Russian project. But how do you hinder companies to build this project in international waters? We in Germany have no legislation to do that. So that is very, we don't have a law on national security which provides a button to press and says no, stop it. So that was the situation. So things continued up to now, but I hope again that we will settle that now.
As we all know, a definition of a good diplomat is somebody who tells somebody else go to hell so that he looks forward to the trip. And frankly speaking, Nord Stream 2 means telling Ukraine go to hell. Not Poland so much, but Ukraine. Whatever words we use, whatever arguments we put forward, legalistic or otherwise, this is a death knell for Ukraine. I'm not defending Ukraine and the problems that the country has with corruption and all that, but clearly by doing this, you're putting Ukraine at the mercy of Putin or whoever else rules in Moscow. And unless we recognize it and say it in plain words, we are playing games. Poland is member of NATO, of European Union, and we are quite secure as far as our energy supply is concerned. Also LNG, the deals with the American companies and all that. But not Ukraine, which depends to a large degree on the fees from the transition of gas through its territory.
2 billion
Right.
annually.
For them, it's a lot of money.
Of course.
You know, maybe not for Germany, but for them, it's a lot of money. And this is the end of even hopes for independence. And that's why I think Nord Stream 2 is a very immoral project. Economically justifiable. And it goes a long way to support what I said a few minutes ago, my country first. Trump says America first, fine. Merkel or whoever else is or will be or was Chancellor of Germany, Germany first. We want this deal is good for us, we're gonna do it, and everybody else take care of themselves. And I'm putting things very bluntly, I'm no longer a diplomat. I used to work at the foreign ministry a long time ago, and I don't have to use that nice language anymore. And unless we recognize it, we are just, you know, using words. The reality check 5 years from now will be very clear. Independent Ukraine will be gone. Not by military means, but by economic means. Putin or whoever else will simply strangle Ukraine to death and will force Ukraine to come to Moscow begging for acceptance. And the far-reaching consequences of that are even too dramatic to think of at this point, because it's also for Poland, because we have a common border. And we will have Russia on our border, not just in Kaliningrad and so in Belarus, but also in Ukraine. And Russia will come to NATO borders full strength. and we will have the Cold War again, with Poland as being the frontier state, not figuratively, but realistically. And this is this is the consequences of Nord Stream 2. Putin will not pass on that chance. Putin will use it to the fullest.
Yeah, just one short bit. I liked your picture of the road to hell, and so I think it was mainly my chancellor and the French president who were closing the gate to this road by negotiating Minsk, by stopping the war, by implementing the sanctions. It was Angela Merkel and the German government who was fighting through the sanctions. I think, well, we are public here, but you know exactly whom I mean, that it was not consensual, that we have these harsh sanctions, and we are, as you know, we are continuing with that. This has a German stamp on. So it is, I think, difficult, to put that diplomatically, to blame the Chancellor for ruining the future of Ukraine. On the contrary, and then just one sentence, it is, and you will see that, she will fight through a deal on future gas transport for Ukraine to secure, as Chancellor, to secure a place for Ukraine on the European side of this road, on which Ukraine is not.
Yeah, so just on that point alone, just like you just said, we're putting that deal into the hands of the players that have committed all the aggression in Crimea and Donbass, now in Syria, built up in Kaliningrad, used WMD and in the UK, shot down a commercial airliner. So we're putting our bets that that deal, however it looks on paper, is going to be a great deal to solve this Ukraine. I think in addition to what we're talking about with Ukraine being exposed at that point when the transit goes away, first, just looking back, when you talked about strategic communication, maybe there could have been better. Often the United States is always accused of this strategic communication issue with our allies and so forth, especially the last few years. But Nord Stream 1 should have instructed us that strategic communication with Nord Stream 1 was a total disaster, and Radek Sikorski, we all remember his words, were really to the point of what happened with Nord Stream 1. And then fast forward, at Nord Stream 2, we're almost in a similar sort of situation with how the allies in the East feel about this. So on top of that, our analysis at SIPA on the militarization problem that goes in hand with Nord Stream 2. So in other words, when you've got that much of the gas flow going underwater in the Baltic pipelines, it will be necessary for Russia to say that they will need a Nord Stream flotilla patrolling the Baltic at all times, and they will identify all the traffic, NATO traffic, in the Baltic because of what they'll install on the Nord Stream 2 pipelines. In addition, if that transit really, again, we believe will actually go away, won't be guaranteed, and then the Russians, if they decide to occupy more and more of Ukraine, they'll have a free hand. They don't have to worry about Ukrainian guerrillas destroying the transit pipeline because there won't be any gas in it. So it'll be an open terrain destruction model for the Russians, should they choose. They'll have a freer hand to occupy or control more of Ukraine. And then the last thing I was just going to say, back to some of the security issues. And first off, I just want to reverse the point here. I want to compliment Germany, and your points on Afghanistan and what Germany is doing in Lithuania are absolutely spot on and needed in NATO. That leadership is very important. The United States recognizes that. And what's happened since Ukraine, Crimea happened, and the response from NATO has been excellent, and Germany has been part of the leadership in there. Poland certainly. But on top of what's happened in Ukraine, when we talk about the war has stopped, it certainly hasn't stopped. You talk to the Ukrainians in Donbass, the war hasn't stopped. You talk to the sailors that are in Moscow jail, the war hasn't stopped. So to believe that Putin is somehow going to make a good deal on Ukraine is, I think, is just, as we say, pie in the sky.
The first comment from Łukasz Warzecha and then Edith.
Thank you. I've been trying to save my comments for the final phase of the discussion as agreed with Mr. President, but I would just like to make a short, or perhaps not that much short, remark concerning, I think, the crucial difference in views that we have already seen here in this discussion. But I will start with an anecdote. I have a friend who is a publisher and who a few years ago wanted to distribute his sport newspaper published in Germany. And what he found out was that he was it was nearly impossible to do that. Not because there was some administrative order not to allow Polish publishers to publish their newspapers or distribute their newspapers in Germany, but because he found out that it was necessary to have an agreement with every land separately to distribute his newspaper in every land, and in every land he had to go through hell to get that agreement. So why am I telling you that? Because if you say that how can we hinder private companies from building Nord Stream 2? If you can hinder a private publisher from distributing a Polish newspaper in Germany, you are really telling me that you are not able to hinder private companies from building such a big infrastructural project. No, you are able. We have a saying in Poland, dla chcącego nie ma nic trudnego, which is exactly in English. So let's be frank and let's be blunt, as much blunt as President Trump is. I think that we have the difference that I spoke about is about whether state leaders really think that their country should go first or not. And when I hear President Trump saying America first, I think he's just sincere, and perhaps he's doing away with hypocrisy. We have lots of hypocrisy in international relations, and this is a normal part of international relations. But be aware that when we in Poland, at least some part of Poles, hear that Germany is thinking about the whole Europe, not about Germany first, we think first about Nord Stream 2, the topic that we've been speaking about, and second about so many other topics like trade, like companies, like public help for industry, in which it is very well seen that Germany has been putting, and this is normal, I'm not judging that bad, has been putting your affairs, its affairs first, and European affairs and its partners' affairs second, but saying all the time that it is not a selfish acting, it is acting in the name of Europe, exactly as you've been saying. So I'm not saying that you are not sincere in that. I'm not saying that you are a hypocrite. I'm just saying that perhaps Germans do think like that. I don't know. But facts are facts.
Edith and perhaps Minister Abraham later.
Yeah, thank you. I just briefly wanted to touch upon reality check and the Hungarian perspective. I do believe that these kind of American gestures that was given by the Pompeo visit would offer Orban a good opportunity to claim a better relation to the US, but it doesn't come cheap. I mean, there are certain requests that should be met in the long run, and if you have a look at the energy diversification sort of like issues that has been also discussed during the visit, on one hand, there is, I think, the criticism of the Hungarian government towards Nord Stream 2 has just evaporated recently, so it's quite striking. And on the other hand, when it comes to the Romanian pipeline or the LNG terminals, if those projects are not gonna, manifest it somehow in the long run, I think that bilateral relations can simply deteriorate. On the other hand, speaking of Ukraine, there is absolutely no signs of the Hungarian government would like to retreat and take a different sort of approach and not to block the integration of Ukraine, both on the level of the NATO or the EU. And I think it has an impact also on the lack of trust within the transatlantic relations, because it's quite important for the US. So this is like the sort of long-term implication of Hungary first, kind of Hungarian foreign policy, and I think it should be taken into account as well that, speaking of lack of trust, the activity of Russian secret services, the way how they can find the way to space to maneuver on Hungarian territories, it's another striking signal that should be taken into account on the level of the NATO. And I think it's quite a fair idea and debate to talk about fair share and greater contribution when it comes to military spendings, but sort of building up resilience, or at least recognition of Russian disinformation warfare, should be also part of the discussion when it comes to the NATO and Central European countries.
Mr. Abraham, a short comment.
Maybe this is also contributing to the discussion we'll be having with you in a second, I think. First of all, just a clarification, I'm completely on board. That was simply a misunderstanding or miswording. Of course, the war has not ended in Ukraine, and that was my first remark. Yeah? But what was needed back at the Minsk negotiations was immediate ceasefire, because back then the Ukrainian troops were very weak. For reasons we all know. That has changed, thank goodness, that has changed, but it was absolutely necessary. It was high noon, and the Chancellor and François Hollande brokered this ceasefire, which is imperfect, and Minsk is another debate, but that's what it's easy to come back to your flotilla thing. Yeah, I'm listening to you, and of course I'm trying to look at a scenario you're describing. I mean, to have a Russian flotilla patrolling the Baltic Sea, we don't need Nord Stream. They could patrol the Baltic Sea every day, 24 hours, with as many ships as they want. They don't, and they could look at NATO. They have their bases everywhere at the Baltic coast, in the Königsberg area and wherever. So a Russian navy presence in the Baltic Sea is not linked necessarily to this project. But of course, we have to look at the security reasons, which the security risk which come with it. But there's one fundamental point I think we really differ, and this is something which is shared by all political forces in Germany, and this is that we think that even, and that is our experience, that even in times of harsh political confrontation, it is not only possible, but also, you have to look at the details, in the interest of the affected parties to do business with the other side, and to just to look at the 80s. So Western Europe, Germany, was buying Russian gas. And by the way, we had a discussion on these Erdgasröhrengeschäft, whatever that is in English, with the Reagan administration back then too. Yeah. But this is really a dividing point. When we look at the 80s, so what was the point? We had the Soviet aggression against Afghanistan. The Soviet Union was the most militarized country in the world. Aggressive ideology, shooting down of Korean airliner 007 over Kamchatka. So it was not too different from today's world. But our experience was that it was possible, and it was sometimes even advisable to not cut links and not judge on the pure financial point that, of course, also back then, Western money for Soviet gas was, of course, somehow floating into the Soviet Union and financing the system. Yeah, but this is really a difference. We have, of course, to check where should be the limits of trade. Where do we become dependent on Russia? This is not acceptable. But as the Chancellor said, our analysis is that below 50% plus LNG, we will not be dependent. But this is a dividing point. On Europe, now I have, and I stop with that, I have to clarify that. I didn't say that Germany has no interest. Of course, we are working in the interest of our people. The question is, what is the consequence? And for us, going alone is not an option. So it is to put it very clearly, it is the European institutions, the European project is in the national interest of my country.
Question for you, it is, should Europe pursue a kind of strategic autonomy, as some French politicians propose, if Europe have any capabilities to do this without the United States?
What I definitely wanted to add is I think it's just simply impossible to strengthen transatlantic relations without paying a special attention to information warfare, and especially in the region, because I think the V4 countries are especially vulnerable in this respect, because Russia can successfully play on internal divisions when it comes to local vulnerabilities. In terms of Poland, it's anti-Ukrainian sentiments. In terms of Hungary, the strong anti-Western rhetorics of the Hungarian government. In terms of Czech Republic, general Euroscepticism. In terms of Slovakia, strong pan-Slavism and anti-NATO sentiments. And just to give you one very strong example of this, how vulnerable we are, in Hungary it has been measured not only by political capital but by other institutions, is that apart from the successful media capture, basically that the leading party has captured the media, the pro-governmental mainstream media has become the key venue of Russian propaganda. And it's really happening. More than 90% of those contents are not spreaded by fringe media or Facebook sort of like platforms, but pro-government media outlets. So in this regard, the government is just depicting the West, London, Berlin, and Western European countries as some sort of apocalyptic place where Muslim immigrants, illegal immigrants, has declared jihad against the native citizens. So that's one issue. And the problem is that it had a sort of measurable impact on the public attitudes. So although Hungarian society, similarly to Polish, is quite strongly pro-European and pro-US, according to the latest polls, especially among Fidesz electorate, so people who are voting for the government, more people would choose Russia, Moscow, instead of United States when it comes to geopolitical preferences and partners. So I think it's quite important to notice this, and I think it's a very important positive development that the State Department had just stood up and said that they're gonna financially support investigative journalists and independent media in Hungary, because it's urgent and it's quite needed. Thank you.
Minister Abraham, a similar question to you. A majority of French and Germans now trust Russia and China more than the United States. And what does it mean for the European politicians in short or longer term? And perhaps an answer is strategic autonomy.
Well, when we're discussing Germany, a German approach to all the issues we were debating, we have to take into account, I mean, we all here this morning, but also and mainly the German government, the way the German population views the international situation. And there we are facing a strong wind into our faces. There are more, I'm regretting very much to report that here, but there are more people in Germany trusting than the US president. It's not the case with China. The people are highly suspicious on China's moves, and we have all this 5G debate and all that. That is extremely, so China is a completely different case. But what is, on a private way, what is extremely worrying and should be debated here in Warsaw, but with Germany, is how can it be that the Russian president has more public support than the President of the United States of America. And again, I don't want to kill your time here, but there has always been in my country a certain number of people who really believe, and I know that I'm speaking in Warsaw, who really believe that it is for the sake of Europe if Germany and Russia are close. This is horror for Poland and horror for political forces in Germany who do not, of course, not share that opinion. And this again is why the answer is we need strong European institutions. And I'm coming back to that. And Professor, maybe it is about the wording. I understand your point. Maybe it's about the wording, but I have to say that as a German diplomat, I will never use the words Germany first, and you will never see a German chancellor or minister of whatever using these words, because we are not using Deutschland zuerst. Everyone who knows the history is that the real translation is Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. And so the whatever country first, for us, has always the affiliation with Deutschland, Deutschland, or whoever, über alles, because this is not, and this is a difference, it's not perceived positively, there is an aggressive potential in this wording. So that was the reason why I was, the national interest, of course, I'm not naive, but the reality is, and you can check that, you can debate that, you're writing about that, Germany is backing European institutions because we think that in the end the European approach serves us more, even if we are facing defeats underway, than going alone, going separately. Yeah, just one example from the recent days. It was the European Commission blocking the diffusion of Alstom and Siemens on trains. This is against our national interest. Yeah, and the US president would say, oh, state of emergency, whatever, we do the merger, now I have it, the merger of the two companies. And we do accept, even though we are extremely furious about that, well, we are accepting the ruling of the Commission because we think that there is something higher at stake, which is in our national interest. Do we have a second chance for closing remarks?
I promised to finish at time.
Okay, so only two sentences. Role of Poland, very important. Handle European problems. That will be welcomed by America and by other European partners. You are on the right way when I look at the Balkans, for example. Handle European problems with us. Provoke Russia. No, that would cost too much time. Okay, my closing remark. You will see strong German commitment to the security of the region.
Professor Lewicki, the final question. Perhaps our discussion is too dramatic. Perhaps in 2 or 6 years of let's say this transatlantic rift will forget about the discussions nowadays, and transatlantic relations will return to the, let's say, normal under Joe Biden's presidency.
I think Trump hopes that Joe Biden would be the Democratic candidate because this would be the easiest contender to defeat. I mean, this is quite obvious. I think the relations between the two sides of the Atlantic are normal. I mean, we establish our goals. Trump establishes very clearly America's goals. There's no war, there's no enmity. I think we are over-dramatizing what's happening. I don't see dramatic differences or tensions between Trump's America and present Europe. We love to hate Trump. We love to say that Trump is wrong in whatever he does. When he wakes up in the morning and steps out of the bed with the right foot, it's awful, with his left foot, it's worse. And if he doesn't get up at all, I mean, this is by far the worst. So this is simply new phase of anti-Americanism, which is a different topic that, you know, we don't have time to go into it. And Trump is a lightning bolt for everybody who hates America, doesn't want to say I hate America, they say I hate Trump. And that sounds much better than to say I hate America. The relations are quite fine. You pointed out the military involvement. There is no trade deal between the US and the European Union. We know the reasons, and there won't be one very soon. That's okay. I don't see that relations should be, I mean, they can always be improved, but I don't think there is a need for repair at this point, and I think we are on the same side of the world, whereas Russia and presumably China are on the other side, and I think we recognize it and nobody questioned it.
And
sorry, I have to.
Yeah, thank you very much. And next, we have the next discussion on the title will be New Europe, Polish and German Perspectives on March the 15th. So I warmly invited with the participation of Professor Waldemar Paruch and Ambassador Ralph Nickel. Thank you very much for today's very interesting discussion. Have a good day. Thank you.